Merry meet, Annie here. Welcome back to Tarot Together. No, it hasn't gone away. It hasn't gone away. Yes, best laid intentions. Sometimes they don't quite pan out. But as I have personally rededicated myself to return to my studies of the tarot, I have dedicated myself, made the decision to be sure about sharing these videos. I learn a lot in the way I have to organize my thoughts to speak here. And I've learned a lot from the comments that you all have posted regarding your thoughts, agreeing or disagreeing with how I look at any one of the cards. And now it's about the Magician here and now. We've dealt with the symbology, and we've dealt with the individual attributes as I see them, and how many times could I possibly stress, and it would not be enough, as I see it. A reminder that we each see our cards and their wisdom differently, both when we initially study them and as we gain more experience working with them and they become an ally and they make it clear what they have to offer us. Everything we collect regarding the information on any particular card, if our style is to read and research and collect information, becomes the presence of that card in the here and now. In a way, it condenses. In a way, it becomes more powerful because certain things begin to ring the most truly to us. Either because a reading has led us to a certain place and we realize how powerful the card was in the reading, or because we have intentionally assembled in a logical way, because some of us process relationship to the tarot that way. We've logically assembled the meanings we shall consider for the card. So here and now, what do we make of the Magician? He is a rather complicated fellow, isn't he? And I remind you that means that we also are complicated. On the one hand, he can seem very one-dimensional. He's frozen in time, isn't he, in that stance that appears to be one of action, but you don't see any action around him. In that sense, he's a little flat because you don't see what he's connected to or what he's creating. But there he stands. It's all about him, it appears at this point in his journey. He's not yet who he is in relationship to everything which is not him. Maybe that's why the card can seem a little bit static, a little bit posed, because it's a little bit separated from everything, everyone around him. But on the other hand, he reminds us how complicated it is when we live just within ourselves. To say that he might be in a more simplistic place in his journey because he hasn't connected outward yet to understand who he is in relation to. There's also a reminder that when we exist in that place, truly whole within ourselves, there's a universe of complexities to that. Perhaps one of his lessons is we learn from that before we intentionally seek outward. The here and now of any one of the cards, after we've done all of our studies and collected our information, we're the kind that just picks up a card and gets an idea by looking at it, is what we remember every time we pick up the card. When we pull it alone or in combination with other cards, it's what lives on in us of the card's wisdom. We won't remember everything we've so carefully collected and the correspondences and the attributes we have determined for each card. But we do well to remember the categories we've given to the card, that all those words fill and inform. Those categories are, in a way, the shorthand, our brain tattoo representing the information that we either have discovered or learn along the way regarding any one of the cards. The categories. The briefest listing of the attributes we ascribe to any particular card or an act of the magician. We name things, therefore they are. We recognize the pattern and we connect to them. I know when I pick up the magician card what I have named it, named myself, in relation to the wisdom of it. I describe each of those in the attributes videos that I did for the magician. The conscious mind, communication, and communication was in the mundane and in the ethereal, mysterious level. The trickster, what we come knowing, the way forward, and the great work of living. Those are my attribute bites for the magician card. The things that will come into my mind when I pull the card alone or in combination with other cards. The conscious mind, communication, the trickster, what we come knowing, the way forward, and the great work. What would be your attributes? The pattern that your brain recognizes, the tattoo that you have created regarding the attributes to the magician's card. You might have some of the same things that I do, probably not all. I'd love to know what other attributes you would name if you were doing a litany in the shortest possible capturing of the wisdom of the magician's card. So for me, in the here and now, when I look at each of those categories, here's how they fit for me in that place of here and now. The conscious mind. It's the beginning of awareness of what's outside of us, not yet the connection to it, but widening beyond the fool's state of being, which is oblivious to anything but being the fool, to an understanding that it is more than us, even if we yet don't know why. We're no longer the oblivious fool. We are beginning to comprehend. We are surrounded by possibility. This consciousness can lack maturity, as we, as the magician, are still exploring where we are within all that vast realm of possibilities that can be overwhelming. But we have a sense that we're surrounded by, and we are creatures of, potential. We start to understand that we have the power to create, perhaps even to manipulate, and to explore the higher purpose for what we do, for our living, our very living. And as with each card, we have the challenges inherent within that. And as is inherent within each card, we have the challenges those things provide. Sometimes provided by them directly, and sometimes provided by our inappropriate, too much or too little, or not in the right time, actions addressing the card's lessons. For me, and I'll share at the end of this when it comes to reversed, my simplistic view of reversals with the magician's card, there is one image that captures it all to me, and it's what I hold in my mind whenever I'm considering what a reversed card might mean. Moving from the conscious mind to communication. For me, the shorthand for mundane communication, this, what we're doing right now, is the phrase that I mentioned in the video on communication, the alchemy of communication. Being reminded that all forms of communication are considered and targeted. They're the naming of something, and they are the act of creation, the alchemy of communication. If we think it, if we say it, if we write it, we have created it, for good or for bad. Thought into word. Word then made manifest. My shorthand for the concept of communication, which is the greater beyond the mundane aspects of communication for the magician is the flow of divine inspiration. It's what flows to us or through us from a higher power. And it's also divine motive. So divine inspiration and divine motive are what explain communication at the non-mundane level for me when it comes to the magician. Divine motive is the reason for being, for doing, that comes following inspiration or communication when we are a channel to what we receive from our higher powers. So that's the way it comes down and over us and how we react to it. The communication is to us. But then there's also divine motive that is the way we reach up to seek that inspiration, to request the openness of that channel and the presence of that communication. So communication is the alchemy of communication when it comes to the mundane aspect of communicating in this world. And it's also the greater communication that is divine inspiration and divine motive within us. The trickster. I do love the trickster. The greatest changes in my life that have been to my benefit have been the result of being the magician or experiencing the magician around me in some way. My condensed relationship to this attribute is that knowledge is hard won and achieved sometimes through dizzying mazes of experience. That's what the trickster comes down for me. Nothing's handed to you on a silver platter. Nothing's easy. We're living in a magical maze, in a way, through which we dance and sometimes downright stumble and fall to the ground. It's full of dead ends and surprises. Welcome and unwelcome challenges, but always with the understanding we get to the good place in the end. Or if not a good place specifically, a better place. The place we really were intended to be all along. And when we get there, we have a greater wisdom because the journey was not predictable. And we experienced more of ourselves along the way. Endless possibilities, endless experiences, wisdom without end, knowledge hard won. Well, what we come knowing, that one's a bit short and sweet for me. We as the magician either already know everything we need to know, or we have the means to discover everything we need to know. What we come knowing does not allow us to excuse ourselves saying we can't because we don't know, or we're unprepared. All the hesitant excuses we give ourselves, we can always come to know. We have all that we need, or the ability to gain all that we need to manifest our magician power. We gather resources, physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual resources, and we make it so. It's all about our prowess and the continual honing of that. We already know everything we need to know, which includes, if we don't, what we know is we have the ability to seek it out. The way forward. He's poised at the edge of that next step. Something is going to happen next in the musician's card. What we came knowing comes into play because we are armed, or we arm ourselves, with whatever we need to take that step forward. The universe provides that communication outside the mundane is an important aspect of the way forward. It's our responsibility to make something of everything we've gathered, the parts of ourselves, and what we surround ourselves with. My spiritual shorthand for this is the quote I shared in the video on this attribute of the way forward from Tarot 78 Paths to Personal Development. And that's by Mueller, Eccles, and Thompson, where they referred to this energy as creative, focused attention. It keeps you poised on the edge of what is to come. And I'd add to that continual, creative, focused attention. Giving birth, making manifest in every moment. And my last attribute for him is, for us is, the great work of living. The attribute that encompasses the two worlds, that above and below power of the magician, the understanding that they are not separate from each other. If the magician is not yet, if we are not yet sure what to do with that, the power in the card is we acknowledge it exists. We're willing to go there and explore it. It's the union of the mundane and the spiritual, the human and the divine, the seen and the unseen. And most importantly, in my view, the union of self with whatever is greater, which could be divine union. It could be that the magician stops distancing himself from the world around him and becomes one with it. It definitely is, as he moves forward, his union with others like and not like him. The magician cannot move forward in his journey without an understanding of, if not the specifics, and usually he hasn't experienced enough yet to have the specifics firmly in mind, but an understanding of the possibility of divine union and living in accord with our higher purpose. The great work of living. The understanding of, even if we don't know exactly what it is yet, what it is that informs and feeds and makes our life be something that we could declare was well lived. That's my summary in the here and now of my relationship to the magician's card, to myself as magician. The conscious mind, communication, mundane and ethereal, the trickster, what we come knowing the way forward, and the great work of living. I don't want to leave without lingering for a moment on the challenges of what his reversed energy might be. Too much or too little of any of the attributes, or their application outside of their correct time. Take a look at this card. It is from the Tarot of the New Visions, which is a version of the Rider-Waite deck, which gives you the imagery that you come to know and love from Rider-Waite, but from the back side. So for instance, the Fool's card, he's in front of you, and you see what he's seeing as he looks forward, away from the cliff. Here is the Tarot of the New Visions card for the magician. When I think of him from this perspective, and in fact this deck has been very helpful for me when it comes to capturing reversed wisdom. This card captures everything about him that matters in that way to me. If we look at this card, with the magician's rapt audience before him, does he look like someone going about the great work of living? Not really. He looks instead like a performer putting on a show for the benefit of the audience of his life. Even if there's an aspect of his reaching to the divine above with his right hand, how sincere is that when it's done for an audience, for a reason that's outside of ourselves? I think of him in this pose as Joe Showman, and Josephine Showman as well. For me, all of the reverse aspects of this card that have to do with his attributes come from the showman who can arise within each of them. The bombastic one who needs to perform, who seeks attention, who thinks that the world is glued to his every move. He's got a lot of actions, but how many deeper meanings are part of that? Probably not many. His words are probably created out of a need to charm, coerce, or impress. They have no humility behind them. He is very distant from the folks in front of him. Look at the separation. The roses and the lily in front of him. The table placed between him and the crowd. The designer of this card focuses more on the roses than the lilies. And I can relate to that when it comes to reversed wisdom. The designer placed the roses between the magician and his audience. It reminds us that the magician has a complicated journey ahead of him to step from behind the thorn-filled boundary in front of him. He literally cannot step forward in this image into the arms of his audience. He's got that thorny barrier of the roses between him and them. The roses in their symbolism hold a lot of promise for him. And yet without the complete embrace of their lessons, they become something which limits his ability to expand. We become stuck in their thorns. The thorns and roses are often seen as a symbol of initiation. Perhaps in the magician's case, in ours, that what we must go through to get out there, to get outside of ourselves. What of that little monkey behind him, tugging on his cape? The description of this card refers to the monkey as possibly the more base side of the magician of our nature, perhaps holding us back. It references the Christian symbology that the monkey, seen unfairly, if I may say so myself, as a creature which mimics man but doesn't have it right, is a reminder that in this card, the magician could be in danger of mimicking the divine, not getting it right, not understanding where his connection is and also where he's different. It doesn't look that much to me in this card. The monkey's face is so wise, and he's being very gentle about the way he's tugging on the cape of the magician. So that imagery, even though it's as the designer intended, didn't resonate so strongly with me. I think he's tugging on the magician's cape to remind us, we have a life to attend to. He's calling the magician back from his showmanship. It's not really about the really big show. The monkey's tugging the magician back to fully experience life. He represents humility to me. That picture does it all for me when it comes to reversed wisdom of the magician's card. Sometimes when you are collecting so much information, and I have reams and reams of stuff that I've collected on the magician, some of which I've shared with you, probably about half of what I have in my own personal notes. Sometimes we capture what the meaning of the card is to us with an image or a symbol that we create. And that's enough, just as it is. A literal image is the tattoo in our brain, and this image of the reverse magician does it for me. So, the conscious mind, all forms of communication, mundane and holy, the trickster, what we come knowing, the way forward, and the great work, and the dangers of being the showman. Empty gestures, empty words. That's the magician for me. I'd like to end this with sharing with you the image that I created for myself, for my personal growing tarot deck. Never to be something that's going to be for anybody other than me, and a meditation tool for me. And this is the image that I have created for myself for the magician's card. I wanted to find a symbol that included the aspects of above and below, as this card does, with the magician, the sphere, at the center of that. And the background was adopted from a picture of a wisteria plant growing in a garden, placing the magician in a garden for me. When I thought of my own personal relationship to the power of some of the gardens I've been part of, the wisteria with the way it hangs low the above and below feeling of the way it hangs, its tenacity, the way its tendrils grab onto everything. The battles I had with it in past gardens, to control it enough that it wasn't taking over the plants around it, becoming its big show, to the detrimentous effect of things around it. This card's simple for me. The power of the garden, the symbolism of the wisteria, and a symbol that for me was the power of as above, so below. A sense of how that plays out in the living of our lives, the great work of our lives. Simple imageries that for me capture my relationship to the magician, my connection to the magician within me. I hope you've enjoyed this series, albeit interrupted and on hiatus for a great period of time in between, of the Magician's card. I'm looking forward very shortly to upload the start to the series of the High Priestess. Very necessary in the next step for the magician. It's about time. He met someone outside of himself to challenge himself. And as I say himself, I know I'm talking about myself and each one of yourselves. Mary Part. I wish you mirth and reverence.